Okay, so Teresa, I said famously at the MIT Sports Conference about 10 years ago that analytics were like a lamppost to a drunk. Useful for support, but not necessarily for illumination. Tell us how this the business has evolved.
This panel is evaluating, drafting, and developing elite athletes. And one of our panelists, the first one I'll introduce as they all find their seats, is Mark Hunter. He is currently the general manager of the London Knights of the OHL, a team that has won 2 Memorial Cups and 4 OHL championships since he and his brother Dale bought the team back in 2000. He was recently the assistant GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs before he rejoined the Knights this summer. Mike Liut played 15 years in the National Hockey League. As a former NHL player, he formed Octagon Athlete Representation in 1998, and he serves as Octagon's managing director. He is currently a certified NHL player agent. Teresa Resch is the Vice President of Basketball Operations and Player Development for the Toronto Raptors. She's been at MLSE since 2013, previously having worked for Lifetime Fitness and the National Basketball Association. And Dr. Dana Sinclair is a licensed psychologist who consults with surgeons, actors, musicians, executives, as well as professional teams and athletes in the NFL, NHL, NBA, MLB, MLS, and auto sports. She's also worked with a number of Olympic teams, took her to the Olympic Games in Nagano, Sydney, and Salt Lake City. And she's a former international athlete herself. She served as captain of the Canadian field hockey team and played hockey for the University of Cambridge. And it's someone who Brian Burke knows well. I'll still introduce him, even though you all know who he is. He's going to moderate this panel. Former NHL executive, holding general manager positions with the Hartford Whalers, the Canucks, Leafs, USA Hockey, and the Ducks, of course, where he won a Stanley Cup in 2007. He most recently held the role of president of hockey operations with the Flames from 2013 to 2018, and now he has joined Sportsnet as a hockey analyst. It's not written in the script, but he loves it. Right, Brian? Yeah, okay. That was convincing. Brian Burke, everybody.
So this is player evaluation and development, and I'll start with you, Mark. We'll talk about the NHL scout works 363 days a year for 2 days in the spotlight, right? So talk about the traditional pattern of scouting, how you identify players, area scouts, whatever. How's it worked historically? Then we'll talk about how it's evolving.
Well, you know what? The first thing for myself over the years and my experience of what I've had is in this game of hockey. Number one, it has always been evaluating players, and there's some things we always looked at, or what I looked at, and one of them, of course, is hockey sense. I mean, it's one of them, to me, one of the main things, and it's skating, of course, puck skills, and Nate's upside, and the last one is character and compete. The character compete brings all the other four together. I mean, if they don't have the desire to get better, over the years where my experience of watching players in junior hockey, and then of course the National Hockey League, and we have examples. I have examples of a guy like Mitch Marner. When we drafted him in London, he was 5'6.5" and 135 pounds, but he had a big heart, big desire, and continue to improve as a hockey player. Of course, he has all the skills to go with it. It's something on the side that I'm constantly looking for. I mean, it's pretty simple, but the mom was almost 6 foot and knew he was going to get some more size, and he did grow. And at that time, at the age of 17, he ended up being almost 5'10", 5'11". Now he's about a 5'11", 170 pounds. But it's something in the genes. But he was a guy that just never kept getting better. And we see in the Toronto Maple Leafs right now that his push and his drive, and there's still more gas in him for him to get better right now.
Okay, so it's the old scout with a cigar at the rink, watching with a clipboard, writing down notes. and now it's evolved a little bit. And how have we evolved in scouting as far as where we've gone with analytics?
Well, you know what? I think some of the older gentlemen in the business, and I worked for Lou for 3 years, and everybody's pushed where Lou wasn't into analytics. He was in more into analytics than people give him credit for. He analyzed and looked at everything. Of age and sample size and difficulty of the leagues. I know the younger guys in the analytics. Well, Lou was on top of that. I mean, that's why he was successful in what he was doing, because of how he looked at everything. And I don't think some of the older guys get credit for doing that. And I see some guys, some people bring it out to the forefront, where Lou is a very quiet guy. He wouldn't bring not too many secrets out there. He keeps his things pretty close, where I think that's from the old to the young, which you just talked about, Burke. I think it's I think sometimes in the business, it's I think you keep things closer to what you're doing. You don't have to tell everybody how smart you are. And I think a lot of young guys in this business want to show how smart they are, instead of just showing on what you got in product you got on the ice. And that's what I see.
Okay, so Teresa, I said famously at the MIT Sports Conference about 10 years ago that analytics were like a lamppost to a drunk. Useful for support, but not necessarily for illumination. Tell us how this the business has evolved.
So I've been with the Raptors now this is my 6th season. And for me, I was, my background, I grew up a volleyball player. I worked at Disney World, and then I worked at the league office and operations for 6 years before joining Lifetime Fitness, so like complete change, so recreation. So that gave me a great breadth of knowledge, but what I'd never done is work for a team before. So coming into the Raptors, I was a clean slate. And Mark, you're just talking about, the guys who have been around a long time. They've been doing it a long time, and there's a lot of wisdom and knowledge that comes from that. So for me, coming into the Raptors was really trying to figure out the balance of, okay, what ideas do I have and things I've seen that aren't at sports or at the team level that make sense? And then ultimately, how do I affect change? And I think analytics is a big piece of that. We have a great group at the Raptors. They do a great job, and they've even evolved a lot over the 6 years I've been there. But I think the thing that's really striking to me is what they're able to do to provide a baseline. It's something that you can't evaluate things if you don't have anything to evaluate them against. So you can go and say, oh, we had a great practice today, but what are you comparing it to? And I think that's what we've really focused on, is providing and figuring out what that baseline is, whether it's analytics, if it's development on the court, if it's physical fitness, it's a whole myriad of different things. And that's really, really helped us to measure progress, and that's also really helped us set goals. And I think that's really shown, starting to show the fruits of our labor now. It's 6 years ago, drafting these guys, it's a draft of potential. Oh my gosh, talking about hockey, the guys that you guys are drafting are so young, and you have to kind of take a flyer on them. And the same thing happens in basketball. It's only two rounds long, so you only get a couple tries, and those picks are becoming more and more valuable as the rookie scale contracts become more and more a great deal as the money keeps coming in for basketball and the salary and contracts. So I think what you're talking about with support versus ruling out is, I want to take it even a step farther, is what the numbers and what setting the baseline does. It really helps us track and evaluate, and honestly, it motivates. If you can say you improved this much over the last year, that's going to motivate you to keep doing those things that are helping you to continue to get better. Because honestly, especially, I know the NBA, that's what I work closest with, it is getting harder and harder to make your team better. Trades are getting harder and harder to do. It's getting harder and harder to sign free agents that you don't already have on your team, so you have to draft well. And you have to invest in the players that you have. And you have to get their fullest potential. And I think really working with our data group as well as our player development group to really set a baseline and show progress has really helped us.
Excellent. So Dana, make full disclosure, Dana worked for me for 12, 15 years anyway.
At least.
And so our template in evaluating players was, number one was eyeballs. we go and watch them play. It's a novel concept for the pure analytics people, but we actually watch the athletes compete, including the warm-up. That's why we don't do it by video, including body English on the bench and everything when a player gets yelled at. Number 2 was our background checks and our interview with the player. So Dana would interview the player. We would find out everything we could about this kid. In the first 3 rounds, we knew everything. We knew what he ate for lunch, what his parents did, what his siblings did, what his cousins did, the whole thing. And then 3rd was analytics. And we'd say, all right, this is what we think we're getting. What can we compare it to? So Dana, talk about the makeup. Baseball uses the term makeup, a player's makeup, his character. How do you assess that?
Right. Well, I'll tell you what it is that I do first. It's sort of the behavioral analytics side of the selection equation. So I assess and interview prospects, and I'm looking for things like how competitive are they? Are they self-motivated? Are they impulsive? Are they going to be consistent? Can they stay focused, especially under pressure? All of these types of things, are they too perfectionistic? Are they too self-critical? So once we've had a look at those things, I mean, I think it's very important to know those things clearly, because it's helping to quantify the risk of each individual athlete. And I do think that that process has to be done properly. You can't back yourself up on just using computer-generated assessments. You have to actually speak with the individual and try to challenge them and push them to find out what really their profile is like. Because I do feel that we tend to forget that talent is, while it's key, of course, it's driven by personality factors and behavioral qualities.
Excellent. Mike, on the player representation side, you're a star goaltender in the National Hockey League. Now you represent players. What has that analytics affected how you guys do your jobs?
Well, we're tapping into everything that the panel has talked about, right? I mean, what has changed in our game is when I recruited Ryan Miller, he was 21. Now we're recruiting 15-year-olds and some people younger, right? So the younger you go, the more impossible it is. The entry draft when I was in college was age 20. Now it's at 18. So it is a guess. But from an analytical standpoint, what Dana's talking about is key, and it goes with Mark's hockey sense, the ability to analyze the game at speed, and the ability, to compete. And that is an ability; it's a skill. So, as a former player, I'm looking for the same things, right? When I go to a game, particularly with goaltending, which I think it's very evident, is they have to be able to track the puck, focus. They have to be able to move, the skills of skating or balance on your skates, and they have to compete. And the compete is not when they win 2-0. The compete is when it's 5-5 and they make 3 saves in the last 10 minutes of the game. That's an analytical stat that nobody's looking at, and I know for a fact it's critical. So, we have, I think I have an advantage because I've studied the game and played it and lived it for a long time. But, those are, when they're this young, 15, 16, it's a guess. It's just a guess. And the other component is the development. I think that it's one thing to recruit a kid, a player. It's another thing to or draft them. But then we find that we have to build not the skill, but the understanding, the hockey sense back into them, because that's being stripped away from the coaching. Everybody is going to look at a successful NHL coach, and the word system has leaked right into Pee Wee hockey. And a system is mutually exclusive to development, right? We used to call it a game of mistakes. Go make mistakes, learn. And now it's a game of don't you dare make a mistake. And that just suffocates players. So, and then back to Dana's point, is that crippling to them? Are they beaten by it? And as they evolve, my favorite topic is, because I just learned this, I think the male brain forms at 25 fully, right, or something of that nature.
Sounds fine
so,
to me.
yeah. So, I mean, you're talking about these kids are going to go through an evolution of emotional change and intellectual change. And sometimes you just throw your hands up and say it's just a guess.
Well, we are producing the best drill executing players in the history of the world. They can go through
without
cones.
Question.
They can go through cones better than anyone back in the day. we've lost some of the hockey sense. And my feeling is that's because there's no unstructured hockey anymore. No one plays
That's
outside.
Right. Without question. I think the kids don't play on the ponds anymore because climate doesn't allow it. And I've said this for years, that below 14, they should have 1 day a week because the kids are playing 5 or 6 days a week, which is crazy, too long. And they should have 1 day where there are no coaches. Just replicate the pond.
And I was just going to add in there, sorry, I was going to say 18, by 18, they're pretty much set. You can go with the profiling at 18.
What about some of us who never grow up?
Well, that's a problem.
So this issue is hockey specific. There is no unstructured hockey for these young players anymore, hardly any. They don't play outside. They don't. The coaches overcoach. There's too many games and not enough practices. So that's what I'm talking about with Mike is we learned hockey growing up. It wasn't 5-on-5 and it wasn't shirts and skins because it was -15. It was gray parka, green sweatshirt, red hoodie, and then against the other guys, and it was 8-on-8. So you learn quickly to move the puck. You learn to find people. It's absent from what our kids do now. When I was in Anaheim, we skated on the Rideau Canal, and we had 2 guys on our team who had never played outside before. Imagine that, NHL players had never played outside before. So Dana, Teresa, you wanted to talk about development too? The use of analytics or the critical things, because we can draft all we want, but if we can't turn them into players, we're not really getting our job done.
Yeah, I think, well, you hit on it a little bit. Once you get a player, that's when your job starts. Really focusing on, and the thing that we've really tried to do is when we talk about player development, it's all encompassing. A lot of times there'll be 2 people on a team that have the same title. It'll be player development, and one will be the drill guy working out with the guys on the court after team practice has been done, and the other one is going to be the one who's taking them to become a professional, showing them how to eat right and showing them how to sleep right. And we said, why do 2 people in our organization have the same title? Well, it's because those things they need to be done together. So I think taking a holistic approach, looking at how we're growing our players, not just on the basketball court in a silo and not just off the court in a silo, but how they complement each other and how they have to develop together. And that's what we've really invested in. And it's interesting you say that about unstructured play. And I think basketball has fallen to the same place. You get these people who, growing up, all they're doing is playing games, and they aren't developing the foundational skills. And I know you mentioned we have a lot of guys who can go through cones, and ultimately in the NBA, like if you're not working on your shooting, you're never going to see a court. And unfortunately, some of these guys, all they do is play games. So we almost had to go the other way, and we have to go back and make sure that sometimes when we get players, we have to go back to the very, very basics and make sure they have the foundation before we really get out there. So it's just doubling down on those things, developing them as a player, and then also understanding what their role is on the team and making sure they're developing those skills that are going to get them on the court. Because ultimately, that's what every player wants to do, is they want to play minutes. The other thing that's really helped us is the NBA and honestly MLSE's investment in our minor league sports teams. So Raptors 905, this is the 4th season, and I think it's paid huge dividends for us. Almost every single player. Last year, our bench mob, as they became affectionately known as, had all logged time in that league, and I think that was why it was so impactful and so important, and why we were able to really see the impact they were able to have on the big team, is because they were able to grow and develop in that very safe structure, and that very structured organization that's directly tied to the Raptors, so they could take those things that they're learning, those foundational things, and apply them before and see how they perform before they go and impact the big team.
And Mark, last year your Marlies won the AHL Calder Cup championship. What was that from a development standpoint? What do you think that's worth to a player?
Well, I think it's, as much as drafting is really important, but the development is a process of taking time to give good people to spend time with these individual players. And I think with the Marlies and just using them as example, how they won, and I think a guy like Richard Clune, that as much as the coaches, we get away from the players within the team, helping out the younger guys. And younger kids seem to listen even better when a player that's been through it and is still playing, and they can seem to push them along of, believing in what the Leafs organization's doing, from lifting weights, power skating, shooting skills. So I think that really helps out, and it's just past experiences too. With when I played for the Montreal Canadiens, the Canadian success was because of the players they had there too, where they knew the Canadian way. And I think you need that in any organization like the Leafs. They're starting to get that, where they know that these players, or the players, young players, have what they expect from the Leafs, what they expect for them to get better. And a guy like Doug Rasborough, Bob Gainey, Larry Robson, they showed the way to the young guys, and I think it was important from the Marlies, where they had a group of older guys there that showed the right way to do things and how to act as a person and how to train, and you need that, and you need that for them to get better.
Mike, from your perspective, do you think the NHL does a good job developing players? Or does it vary team to team?
It varies team to team for sure. They could do a better job. I think that the American League still is, put them in the cauldron and see who bubbles to the top. And I think that they need to spend more time working on the development of each individual and how they play and approach the game. They have a difficult job, as we do, because we're getting players that are coming in with a completely different mindset than when Mark and I played. And there's a lot of entitlement in the world today, and that's it's creeped into to hockey, as one should expect. And they don't stop to think that the National Hockey League is a very limited universe of people. And when you talk to a kid, a young player, you might say, I've said this many times, there's you're a skilled centerman. You ever play the wing? No, I'm a centerman. Okay. How many centermen are there in the league, right? And easier when there was 30 teams, times 4, 120. No, there's only 60, right? And they don't stop to think that there's 60 or 62 skilled and 62 not so skilled. And they play different roles. And all the not so skilled centermen in the NHL were all skilled when they played junior in college. And they have to adjust. So it's that adjustment to pro hockey that we struggle with.
Well, at one point we were all skilled, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Might have been Pee Wee.
Yeah, but when you put them into the world pool,
yeah,
right, you find out how skilled or unskilled you actually are. And that's why I say the least skilled guy in the NHL is one fine hockey player.
Yeah, exactly. Dana, what do you think about that on the development side?
Well, I think that individual development is critical, and I think you're right. Most teams don't do as good a job of it as they could, because if an individual player cannot control his emotions under pressure, he's not going to get the most out of himself, and there goes the results and the money and the career. So individually, I think that they need to really learn what derails them on the ice and off the ice, and go through a particular process that's quick and easy to learn and pre-plan what they need to do and what they need to change. And it's not as hard as people think, but people tend to ignore this on teams.
Yeah, and to Mike's point, like my teams, we always put up a grid, and we had job descriptions in each grid. So there were 12 forwards, 6 defensemen, 2 goaltenders, job description. And we drafted for a job description. You had to draft a guy and say he's going to fit in this box. So it might be a third line left wing, has to check, has to fight once in a while, has to be able to kill penalties. And so when that player gets hurt, we don't call up the best player from the American League team. We call up the player from that box. So you draft with an eye on a certain box on the team. Go back to the draft when you mentioned him before, Mitch Marner. I was at that draft. I thought you were going to take Noah Hannafin, big, skilled defenseman. I thought you made a huge mistake taking this tiny kid, but it's worked out pretty well.
Yeah, it has. I think I inside information where I was in London, so I ended up drafting him in the OHL and knew his makeup and knew his desire, and that's where I think what you just said earlier on about the gathering all the information the scouts have to do and making sure what you're getting to they have to improve, and they have to keep getting better, and they have to want to win. And Mitch has some attributes that it's important to any hockey club, and we end up winning a Memorial Cup in London. I just think he will keep pushing here to win a Stanley Cup, because that's what he's all about. And just to get back to, that's what you need when your scouts need to find that inner desire. And I just, it just really, from my instincts and watching him, and I just knew he's going to just blossom.
Mike, who's the most competitive guy you ever played with?
Got to say my brother, right?
Brian's son.
Well, he was, certainly when he in Philadelphia when he was competitive. Brian certainly. He's right there. Kevin Dineen, very competitive. And the guy that just to put it full, the most competitive guy that I played against, Wayne Gretzky. Right. I'd made there was this one moment where I made a stop. It was a great stop. Right. It was against Wayne. It was on the cover of the Journal the next day in Edmonton. After that, puck went over the glass. He came right back. He came around. He tapped me on the pad. Said, "Great stop." Went right to the face-off before we changed. Right, and put his stick down. Let's go again. Like, you got that one. Let's see if you get this one, right? Very subtly, there's not a lot of physical part to his game. Obviously, he's too busy scoring, but he was supremely driven.
Dana, who's the most competitive guy you drafted?
Ooh, I'm thinking I'm going outside of hockey. Russell Wilson.
Seattle Seahawks.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Teresa, how about you?
Well, I think I haven't drafted this guy, but
that
Michael,
you work with.
when you were talking about that, I was just thinking about Michael Jordan, how he has a reputation of being the most competitive guy, and how he was able to channel that to become the greatest. I think anytime you see a player, because they're all competitive, they don't make it this far if they're not competitive, but those that really get to the elite level are able to channel that competitiveness, similar to what Dana kind of was mentioning, channel that competitiveness for good and to help them get to the top.
Okay, so we're going to open this up for questions in just how's our time, Trev? Okay, so we'll open up for questions in 5 minutes. Going back to when they changed the rules, Mike, you said drafting 20-year-olds, how much easier would that be than drafting 18-year-olds?
Immeasurably. You have more time to analyze them, right? So there's more of a book on the player. And you have more time to watch them go through the process of being a young player, say in the CHL, having success. What does he do after that, right? From 19 and 20, does he keep going? And you just, I'll go back to Wayne. Like every time I played against Gretz, and we played together against each other for 14 years, there was many times something new in his game that I hadn't seen before. Just something little. Right, so it doesn't happen by accident, and so if you have a 4 or 5 year period to watch somebody, you're going to see that.
And your feeling on the draft age in the NBA, Teresa? It's one and done mostly, right?
Well, it's actually changing. So they're talking about going back now to making it eligible. It's working with the NCAA and their rules of what's possible. So it's looking like we're actually going to be able to draft guys that are younger again, which opens up a huge can of worms. But I think the one thing that you always are looking for is that one NBA skill, and a lot of times that skill reveals itself pretty early. It's just all those other things that, all the intangibles that come along with it. And those are the things that we've been really successful at finding. I think Fred VanVleet is a great story. He played 4 years undergrad at Wichita State. He led that team. They always won. He was always a winner. But you look at him play, and you're just kind of like, where does he fit? Where does he fit on an NBA team? He's kind of positionless. Well, not positionless. He's obviously a point guard. But how does he fit? How does he make an impact? And he has proven himself time and time again to be an invaluable part of our organization.
Teresa mentioned one skill. On my teams, I'm sure it's the same with yours, Mark. Even in the last round, even in the 7th round, the player has to project one NHL skill. If he doesn't, you're just guessing. It might be his shot, it might be his motor, it might be his hockey sense. But if he doesn't have one NHL skill that projects, he's never going to play. You guys do it the same way?
I agree with you, Brian. especially in the later rounds. I mean, the early rounds, you want more than just one good skill. I mean, but in the later rounds, your hope and projection is a fast skater, or his hockey sense is real good. One thing, as being involved in hockey, we all believe we can get their skating better as long as they've got an engine there. They want to get better, and it's hard to improve the hockey sense, but the skating can be improved. Strength. If you get strength, the skating will get better. So, yes, I really agree. The one thing that is very important is you push one thing that he does really well, and it usually, hopefully, you blossom the other parts of his game.
Okay, perfect. All right, any questions from the group here?
I guess the other thing I'm just going to add real quick is on draft night. The other thing that we're really looking at when we're evaluating players is how they've gotten better. Kind of goes back to the baseline. So the first time we see a guy, it's like, okay, this is where he's at. This is the one skill we think he might have. This is where he needs to improve, and then tracking that over time. So even if a guy isn't quite there, if we've seen improvement, and obviously the intel, talking to coaches, things like that, you get a little bit of that, and that he's improved, and this is the area, and this is how he works. Like, we're going to draft that guy. Because
sometimes though you got to be careful of that though, because I've seen in years past. I know everybody in London. Sometimes we hide guys there, and we have million scouts there. They get all worked up because we have fourth line players there, but they're not really fourth line players. The year we went to the Memorial Cup, we had our fourth line was Bo Horvat, Chris Turney, Josh Anderson, and all three are playing in the National Hockey League. Made a good team. They were young kids, got hidden down the lineup. Should have played more. And the scouts come back, wow, Josh Anderson, you didn't play much. Well, at the time I had some other players better. So you have to be careful of watching players from the scouting standpoint where they get hidden down the lineup because they're a good team. We had a good team. We were winning. We had Austin Watson. We had Vladdy Neskakov, and I could go on with some good players. And they got hidden down there, and they fell in the draft because of it. And they end up being good players. Where Tim Burke from San Jose ended up drafting Chris Turney in the second round. And everybody said, wow, that's the worst pick ever. Played in the fourth line for the London Knights. Why would they draft in the second round? Well, he was right. Well, Tim Burke, he had a gut feeling. He's seen him, watched him, and seen that he was hidden down the lineup. And now he's an NHL player who's going to play 800-900 games and a quality player in the National Hockey League.
And a guy that doesn't fit one box fits like 6 boxes. He's a Swiss Army knife.
And he was hidden down the lineup where it took good scouting and where you're watching him and keying in on a guy where you're going, why is he down the lineup?
You're holding him back.
Maybe I was.
That's what we say. we call up Mark and go, you're holding my guy back.
That's what the agent said. I had Joe Resnick call me all the time. Why are you not playing this guy more? Well, you had a good team. And it takes the pecking order of a good team. You had your first and your second, your third line. And that's why I give Chris Turney and the dad, and maybe not Joe. Joe was going crazy on me. But with the rest, with the dad and the young man, they accepted the role. And you know what? Next year he played a lot for us, took off, and a great pick by the San Jose and Tim Burke, of course, who stood up and made a tough decision at the time.
That was my theory on why I didn't play more. I thought they were just holding me back. Yeah.
But it shouldn't be lost, the Mark's comment about the parents, right? Like,
well, that was going to be my next question. If we didn't have one from the crowd, we'll hold up one sec. Parents.
Well, in that case, what is happening with that player is that he's learning from those older players, the better players. He's chasing them that are on that team, right? When you play on a good team, you're learning the intangibles, how to compete, how to challenge yourself, fight for your ice, right? That it's just, these are for sure, I don't know the young player, but for sure, though, that experience in London carried forward to the NHL and allowed him to move through I assume he started in the American League and to play. There's no accident with that.
And you know what, it's funny, we've had years past, and because I used to argue with the analytic boys there from the Leafs, because I go, Robbie Thomas. He was a young man that played for London. At 16, they go, well, why need you play him? I says, well, he's 16. We're breaking him in slowly. We won a Memorial Cup in 2016, and he was not a fringe player, but just we're breaking a spare player. And he accepted it. You know what? He had character to fight through it. Because when you get to the National Hockey League, it's not all sunshine. There's going to be bumps in the roads where You got a guy like tough guy like Burke here is going to say you're not playing tonight or you're getting sent down, and how you adapt to it. If you just sit there and cry like a little baby, or you sit up and go, I'm going to battle through this, where Chris Turney's, the Robbie Thomas, they battled, and that's why they're going to be NHL players. They're not going to accept being down. They're going to keep going.
Parents can be a great asset, can be a great liability. What's your view on their role?
Oh, the parents are so important. I mean, those are the people that give these guys the foundation. When we're doing intel reports, the parents are like the most important people that we're trying to learn about who they are, what their background is, how they've impacted their kids. And I mean, looking at our roster, all their parents have been very involved in their lives and have been a huge, huge influx. And I think what Mike was saying about teammates is also really important. And you made a comment about sending them down. And I think that's the one thing as an organization we've really tried to focus on. When you're getting sent quote unquote down, it's actually the team is investing in you. We're investing in you to get better. And I think the biggest thing is you don't get buy-in right away from that, but when you can point to stories where you can say Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet played almost exclusively, I shouldn't say exclusively, sometimes there's injuries, but in the G League their first couple of years, they won a championship there. Now they're huge role players for our team. They're a reason why we have the deepest bench. And now guys who see the opportunity to go to the G League want to do it. They're asking us to play there because they see how that can impact them, their skill development, and their ability to impact the big team. So I think sending down and like proving yourself we've taken it even one step farther. They're asking us to play there. They're wanting to play there because they see how that can really pay dividends and be able to impact their career. And we just signed Fred to a free agent contract. That's when you get the money. So I think that's also another thing. And when I relate that to parents, a lot of times the older players, the players who have gone through it, are serving as those guidance of like, do it. This is going to help you. I did it. This is what happened to me.
Dana?
I don't worry about parents at all. I think by the time they get to me at a draft, they're 18. It's all about them. Their behavioral profile is set. They can always improve for sure, and that's part of what development is. But I've seen so many sort of good parents who cannot deal with their kid and vice versa, that it really doesn't have an impact on my area at all.
I can tell you from experience, parents can be a major hindrance to a player. Can be a major hindrance to a player's evolution. And I'm not going to name the players because it's not their fault. But I've had players where the parents were involved, and not with me, because I'd say to them, look, this is the first and last time we're going to talk. Like, he's ours now. You got him here, thank you. He's ours now. But I've had to have that conversation probably half dozen times with parents. I want to talk to you about my son's ice time. We're going to talk today, and then we're never going to talk again, except when I walk by you in the dressing room, outside the dressing room. So it's some part of the research we do on players is the parent a problem? If the parent's a problem, it's going to be a problem for us. And the last thing, too, a lot of teams, we always had a do not draft list. Do you guys have a do not draft list?
Yes, we did.
So we had kids that were, the psychological profile on them was so poor, we wouldn't draft them even in a late round. Okay, and I went to training camp with the Indianapolis Colts. They did the same thing. They had a do not draft list. Where this kid's a big enough problem, we're not going to touch him in the 7th round. We're not going to invite him to camp. We want nothing to do with him. And that you guys all are the same, Mike?
Yeah, you know what the problem with that, Brian, is if you do draft him, it takes so much time from the development department working with them that it takes away from all the other boys. It's really not fair. So it's just almost too much work to get to the end result of being a team player and actually you can win with.
And you might not even get there because there is a category of players that will not change. You cannot help them, you cannot develop them, it's not going to work. They might have, snippets of good behavior, but they will go back to their default and they will cost you money and trouble.
And you know what I find in the coaches' room, and Brian, you can attest to this too, is when the coaches are constantly talking about one player, it's distraction to the whole team of getting better. And we've had it in London, and we just move on.
In the old days, they would send a player down by putting a safety pin with a train ticket on his pants while he was out of practice. So he'd come off the ice, and there'd be a train ticket, safety pin to his pants, sending him to the minors. We're a little more civilized now. Question, please.
For Dr. Sinclair, would you mind sharing some of the frameworks you have in terms of your evaluation, like with Dr. Duckworth in terms of grit, or Dr. Nadir with Yate, some of those frameworks that you find really successful?
Well, I think you can use a number of frameworks, but really the key is to be able to interview them after. You cannot rely on something that's computer generated. Something like the grit profile, while fun and sort of a nice sort of party trick, it's all self-report. It's just a few questions. It's not going to tell you, certainly in a professional setting, what you're getting in terms of that individual. So I think really it's the interview process that's critical, and finding someone who can do that well is important.
Thank you.
We have another question there.
Hi there, guys. My name is Cooper. I'm in my third year at Brock University. This is for Teresa, but really everybody up at the panel. What is the biggest driver in a player having success early in their career, but then slowing down in year 2, 3, 4, etc.? I'm thinking guys like Dak Prescott or Norman Powell, for example. Other than beginner's luck, what are these factors, and how can they capture that play back and put it back in their games?
That's a great question. You see it a lot. What is it, the sophomore slump, right? It can be a variety of things, honestly. The things I've seen, when you're a rookie, nobody's seen you before. You'll even see it sometimes rookies, especially if they're very, very talented, they'll be able to go out, really make an impact, and you'll even see, like after the All-Star, it already kind of starting. So or the second time you start playing teams. So, this league, they're smart. They do a lot of research. They go up against a guy one time, they're going to remember him the next time. So that's one. The other thing is just figuring out the league, trying to figure out how to be a professional. The jump from, most of these guys are coming from the NCAA or even European basketball. The jump from playing, at most probably 35 to 40 games to playing 82 is huge. These young kids also are not, they're 20 years old. How much did you think about how much you slept in 8 at 20 years old? You don't think about that and the impacts that it has on your body. So I think there's also, and that all goes along with professionalism. So I think figuring that out is also tricky. And then also the makeup of the team. Trying to figure out your role, what value you can add, also plays a role. And I think Dana can probably talk more than I can, but just there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of things that these guys have never dealt with that are coming at them at a much higher and intense level. So to figure out how to control is not probably the right word, but how to deal with and manage it. It takes a while, and you'll see some guys kind of have that adrenaline rush, and they'll get them through. But then when they have to really perform at a consistent basis,
and it's a big thing. It goes into how you put your team together. Your senior leadership group is a big part of that. You can't count on the coaches to do it all. You have to have people in the room that will shape these guys, even to the point where they sit. Which player sits beside each player. The coaches spend time on that. It's no accident. Usually they have defensemen together, but they'll put Mark Giordano in Calgary, who's the best leader on the team. They'll put him next to a rookie rather than next to a veteran.
Okay, cool.
The other thing is a lot of these young guys, they'll never been exposed to the way that an NBA team does player development. So if things get tough, they'll go back and they'll retract to the drills, the things they did growing up that got them to where they were. And honestly, a lot of those are not what's going to get them to the next level. So they're working really, really hard, but they're not working really, really smart, and sometimes it'll set them back.
All right, thank you.
Hi guys, fantastic panel. Learned a lot. I won't be drafting anytime soon, that's for sure. My name is Adil. I manage the NHL app within Canada, and the question that I wanted to ask you was, what are some of your biggest draft regrets, positive, negative?
We don't have enough time.
and what was the lessons that?
Jesus Christ, I'd be here all day. I went 4 years in Vancouver and didn't draft one player that played in the NHL. 4 drafts in a row. We changed some of the scouts after that.
My question though was, what's sort of the biggest lesson that came out of that where you said, how did I miss that? That makes a lot of sense. What was that insight, that lesson from that regret?
Well, I'll let you guys go first. Hans, you go.
Well, you know what? You're always analyzing. If you're not looking back at drafts and analyzing where you made the mistakes, you're not getting better. And I think it's very important where I think anybody in the hockey world have a hard time going, wow, geez, I really screwed that up and I made a mistake, because you are going to make mistakes in the draft. The percentage of the kids that are playing from them drafts, it's going to happen. I mean, we can sit there and look at Aho or Dermott. We went one pick ahead of Aho. Aho's a good player. We could sit there and analyze. Now, the way we're thinking, we had Marner and did we need another Aho? But we didn't draft Aho. So you can sit there and look back at drafts and say, where did I screw up? But I think one of the problems in a lot of teams, my personal opinion, is people take it too personal and sit there and analyze, where did I go wrong? Like,
you can draft safe too. There are teams that draft safe and take players that they know are going to play but maybe not be any good, and I just refuse to live that way. Like,
That's just limited potential.
And that's where I think
you're not going to hit. You're not unless you strike out once in a while. You'll never hit home runs. So,
and that's where I think Shanny from the top of the grid, he has been very good from the start. He wants to go for it. He wants not just to be, well, maybe he's just going to be a fourth line player or a fifth, sixth defenseman. He never. If we talked that way, my scouts, the hammer would come down. He didn't like it.
And interestingly today too, agents are more and more hiring psychologists or helping their players get through interviews, teaching them how to do it. I was on a plane once on the way to the NFL Combine, and there was an agent sitting there basically teaching his guys how to do the written tests. So that changes things a little bit too.
Yeah, when we talk to players at the NBA Combine, 5 years, the first year, it was rare that anybody ever worked with a sports psychologist.
Right.
Now, if they haven't, they're in the minority.
But I'm talking about specifically to get through the interview process, not sort of
okay, I got you.
performance on the court. So it's a different thing.
Different thing, yeah.
And with that, we've talked to the kids about. I mean, that is a big part of it. Right down to a scripted answer, and the scouts all laugh at it. I mean, you read through it. What we would encourage player to do is to talk passionately about the game. It's a job interview. Tell them how you want.
You're
how
not
you
telling
play.
me they're not schooled. Stop it. You
Not our
agents school.
guys.
You
No,
agents
the other
school
guys.
them all.
Yeah, your guys.
Yes, stop it there. Yes, you're not.
No. I'm
What?
telling you. I'm
Some are
telling
pretty
you.
good too.
Draft one of our players and you'll know.
I will tell you, I stopped interviewing players at the Combine because they're so well coached.
I had to
and I
call
try
you
to
out.
screw them up. I'd say, "What kind of a dog do you have?" And the kid's like, well, "Jesus, that wasn't on the list my agent gave me." So he's thinking, "Well, I don't want to have a wimpy dog. Maybe I should say a Rottweiler." And this kid's totally screwed up. Now I got him where I want him. Now I start asking him questions. I ask him, "What kind of watch is it? What watch are you wearing?" He's like, "Well, if I say an expensive one, he's going to think I'm entitled. If he say it's a Timex, he's going to think I'm cheap." Now I got him off the script. Okay, talk about hockey. So I stopped interviewing kids at the Combine because of what you guys do. Question.
Not us. Hey, that's a broad brush. You can't do that.
We got time for one more.
Hi, Phil Mizuki, Durham College sport business graduate student. Society and sport culture are constantly changing, and 18-year-olds today are much different than the ones maybe even 5 years ago. What kind of initiatives are you taking to stay on top of changing player mentality and skill sets as they come up?
I'm not sure that. I think that there's more pressure in the world. I think that they're exposed to a lot of outside stimuli that influences their personality. But the players that are going to be successful are zeroed in on what they're doing. They're playing hockey. If they're distracted, certainly playing video games, they can get trapped into playing them till 2 o'clock in the morning. But that's no different than watching TV till 2 o'clock in the morning. So if they're playing junior, right, and they're not going to school, then they have no reason to get out of bed in the morning. That's also a problem. So I think that you try to encourage them to have a full life, to have other interests, to stay focused in playing hockey, to make that their primary goal. But read a book, stay engaged with the world. I mean, that's you're going to have a better athlete. But the focus for them is still they get up in the morning and they should be thinking about practice and what they're going to achieve, and the practices are the links between games. So, if they don't have that, they're not going. All the rest of it is moot, actually.
Okay, we're going to move on here. I want to thank our panel. We'll take a group picture here. The next speaker up will be Christine Simpson from Sportsnet, is interviewing Donald Fear, the executive director of the NHL Players Association. We got about a 5-minute break now, and then we're going to go 10-minute break, and then we'll go right into it. Thank you, panel.
Thank you.